So there was a moment during the discussion, I think it was you, Steve, when you said that we're at a point of partisan tribalism. So I think a lot of that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of, where the source of that is people do have a mistrust of mainstream media. And so they're much more willing to, find alternative facts, different sources, things like that online. And a lot of it is mistrust in the funding for a lot of the sources. Like Donald Trump, usually when he mentions the New York Times, he calls them the failing New York Times. And kind of the implication there is that they're just trying to find whatever stories they can in order to sensationalize it, in order to keep themselves afloat, that kind of a thing. So I guess my question is, how well-founded are those criticisms or, just kind of, how well-founded are those suspicions in the mainstream media, and where that funding is coming from? How much of an effect is that funding having on things like journalistic ethics? And is it possible for journalists to, go around that and not have funding affect them in a way that is going to, ultimately create what our news is?
Yeah, that's a great question. Two parts towards an answer. So I remember when, 3 network TV channels, 2 or 3 papers of record, the voice of God coming at you all the time, and a Cold War consensus that established a certain boundary of legitimate discourse, and everything outside of that was considered subversive or irrelevant. And so, to the history of my organization, when Mother Jones was founded in '76, the tagline was a magazine for the rest of us. Well, that no longer applies, because the control that those dominant networks and print outlets had on this interpretation of the events of the day, and frankly the interpenetration of the intelligence systems and the media systems that existed at that time, that to reinforce that's over, and it's not coming back. And that fragmentation or distributed knowledge has this incredible liberatory moment. Never forget that. The fact that you can get a different interpretation of the world out to people is an incredibly powerful and democratizing moment, I think. And it's dangerous too, because there are no standards, there's no cultural norms, there's no professional practice. In this country, we don't have a Standards and Ethics Bureau. There's no Official Secrets Act. There's nothing that says, hey, you can't really do that, right? So it's wide open right now, which is where the back door of uncontrolled money comes in, to not enable speech, but to increase the volume of the speech. That's the danger of the money, is that how loud it gets to be. For us, and this is sort of my second part to your answer, it doesn't quite get to what you're asking, but we talked about earlier about a diversity of revenue streams is absolutely essential, not only to protect the organization through the ups and downs of the economy, but to protect us from being unusually vulnerable to pressure from individual donors or funders. So we've made a point of having a diverse source of revenue and relying on a lot of small donor gifts, small individual gifts and subscriptions, as well as all the usual stuff that happens. So 70% of our revenue comes from readers, and only 15% from foundations and 15% from advertising. So it gives us, in this particular instance, a relatively strong basis to push back against undue influence from potential funding sources, to the point where if we need to fire somebody, as painful as it'll be, we'll fire a funder. We won't go back to him, or we won't take the money. So it's a complicated dance. I don't deny that. It's filled with nuance. But I think that's some version of that is what journalism needs.
I think the key to funding also is that, at least the way we do it, and my understanding is the way news organizations do it as well, the idea originates with the organization. With us, it originates with our researchers. In media organizations that take funding, it originates in the newsroom. And then you go out to seek the funding. You don't have the funders come to you and try to commission something. And that's a really important distinction.
I'll just add that I don't agree with the premise. I don't think that concern over funding sources influencing journalism is the primary reason that people distrust media. First of all, there's not that much money in media to begin with. And I think that maybe because we're oftentimes the only ones reading our stuff, journalists are especially good at writing about journalism. The reason that we all know about the New America Google situation that Steve mentioned is because the New York Times is on top of it. And will be until this thing goes away, maybe more so than anything we saw in the 2016 election. And just from my own personal experience, I don't know anybody who's lasted at a reputable media outfit who hasn't gone to war for the ethics of that institution. Linda described them as small dust-ups, but I've been like to all-out battle.
Well, I've been there.
Over and over again. And the people who don't want to fight for the ethics of journalism just go into PR and make a lot more money anyway. So they're a scrappy bunch.